The guitar, an instrument that has become synonymous with Western, especially Anglo-American culture, is now one of the most popular and iconic musical instruments in the world. Its distinctive sound and versatility have made it a staple in genres ranging from rock and pop to classical and jazz. However, this modern symbol of Western music has a rich and diverse history that is often overlooked, even deliberately ignored for political reasons. Long before the guitar took on its modern form, stringed instruments with similar characteristics were being played in ancient civilizations. The earliest ancestors of the guitar can be traced back to instruments like the oud in the Middle East, and the now almost entirely forgotten transitional forms developed in North Africa and Spain. These instruments laid the groundwork for the guitar's development, influencing its shape, manufacturing, and playing techniques. As we delve deeper into the guitar's past, we uncover a fascinating journey through different cultures and eras. From the steppes of Central Asia to the markets of medieval Spain, the guitar evolved and adapted, absorbing influences from each region it touched. Its story is a testament to the interconnectedness of human creativity and the enduring power of music to transcend boundaries. Let's start from the beginning of what is known about the mysterious origins of the first guitar-like instruments. The mysterious origins of the oud and similar stringed instruments date back about 2,000 years, probably in Central Asia, where similar instruments are still played, usually with 3 strings and a skin-covered body. These instruments spread to the Far East, becoming the Japanese shamisen and Chinese pipa, and to Africa. Over time, they developed into the modern oud as well as the saz, tenbur, and similar instruments in the Middle East during the Middle Ages. As these early stringed instruments traveled across continents, they absorbed local cultural influences and evolved in unique ways. The shamisen, for instance, became a cornerstone of traditional Japanese music, while the pipa found its place in the heart of Chinese classical compositions. In Africa, variations of these instruments were incorporated into rich musical traditions that continue to thrive today. The oud, with its deep resonant sound, became particularly influential in the Middle East. It was during the Middle Ages that the oud began to take on the characteristics we recognize today, influencing the development of other stringed instruments across Europe and beyond. From being a crudely simply made instrument, it became a luxurious, often ornate pride of its makers, and developed into a larger, more advanced construction with a deeper and louder sound, and up to 6 strings or pairs of strings. At the time, the majority of the population of Andalusia, the southern part of Spain, was Muslim and Arabic speaking, and it became the center of oud making and the related musical styles, as well as many other crafts and art forms associated with the Arabic culture. The influence spread over Europe to become instruments like the mandolin, the very cumbersome and quiet but highly sophisticated classical lute, and in mostly Spain and Portugal, the vihuela, which is thought of as the direct ancestor of the guitar. In the late Middle Ages, the once flourishing Andalusian culture faced a devastating blow. Muslims, who had significantly contributed to the rich tapestry of music, art, and craftsmanship in Spain, were driven out in one of the worst genocides in European history. This tragic event, often overlooked and shrouded in the annals of time, left a profound scar on the cultural landscape. The forced expulsion of Muslims, known as the Reconquista, marked the end of an era of coexistence and innovation. The intricate sounds of the oud, the vibrant rhythms of Andalusian music, and the masterful craftsmanship of stringed instruments were silenced. The rich heritage that had once thrived in the region was systematically erased, leaving behind a void that would take centuries to fill. Today, the echoes of this dark chapter still resonate in Spanish culture. Prejudice and hatred against Muslims and Africans, rooted in this historical atrocity, continue to influence contemporary views. The true origins of the guitar, intertwined with the contributions of these marginalized communities, are often overshadowed by a false historical narrative. By the beginning of the time of the Renaissance, the 15th century Arabic and Muslim culture was almost completely gone from Spain, but the vihuela, ironically developed out of the oud, had become an everyman's instrument. With frets, a relatively new invention, and a narrow neck, it was more suited to playing chords rather than just melodies, which was to become a characteristic of European music in the centuries to follow. The vihuela survives mostly as an obscurity to Renaissance enthusiasts today, not having the status and classical repertoire of the lute or the mandolin, though the name vihuela is used for an unrelated instrument in Mexico that's really just a smaller form of the modern guitar. The vihuela developed into the first guitars, which were a much smaller instrument than we know it today, more similar to today's ukuleles, with 4 or 5 pairs of strings. The instrument with the higher status was the lute, an instrument even more similar to the Arabic oud, with its large round-back construction and sometimes an extensive number of strings. As the Renaissance flourished, so did the evolution of stringed instruments. The lute, celebrated for its intricate design and resonant sound, became a staple in the courts and among the nobility. Its popularity overshadowed the humble guitar, which continued to evolve quietly in the hands of common folk. However, the guitar's simplicity and accessibility made it a beloved companion for many. It was during this period that the guitar began to develop its distinct identity, slowly but surely differentiating itself from its predecessors. The rise of the orchestra as the main form of classical music in the 18th century made composers and instrumentalists set aside the lute and guitar in favor of the instruments featured in the orchestra. The lute and guitar was never suited to orchestral music because of their low volume and mellow timbre, so there's a lack of repertoire for the guitar and lute for over a century. The major composers we remember today pretty much completely ignored them in favor of the piano ensembles like the string quartet, or single woodwinds with piano or string accompaniment, and the violin became the instrument of common people all over Europe, each country developing their unique way of using the instrument. From the north to Ireland and Britain and the various cultures of East Europe, violin traditions were developed that remain until today, while the guitar and lute only remained in small local circles as an obscurity, played more at home than in public, curiously often by women. Around this time, local variants were also developed, such as the cittern, the Portuguese and English guitar, a steel string instrument almost completely forgotten and only recently revived by a few enthusiasts. As the 19th century dawned, a remarkable transformation began to take shape. The guitar, once overshadowed and relegated to the quiet corners of homes, started to emerge from its obscurity. This period, brimming with the fervor of the Romantic era, brought with it a renewed appreciation for the guitar's unique voice. In Europe, particularly Spain, the guitar found its renaissance. Luthiers and composers in Spain passionately embraced the instrument, crafting guitars that were both visually stunning and sonically rich. Figures like Antonio de Torres revolutionized guitar construction, giving birth to the modern classical guitar. Though he is often credited as its sole inventor, there are many others who contribute to its evolution. A louder, deeper and clearer sounding instrument capable of highly dynamic and subtle expression, with enough volume to fill concert halls and drive large ensembles. The Romantic era's literature, with its celebration of intimacy, individuality, and emotional depth, found a perfect companion in the guitar. The instrument's ability to convey a wide range of emotions made it a favorite among poets, composers, and musicians. While the classical guitar was still a bit of an outsider to the mainstream of the classical world, much due to its lack of a place in the orchestra, classical guitarists and composers were highly respected by all classical circles by the early 20th century. And since then, an increasing amount of composers, not necessarily thought of as guitar composers, started writing for the instrument, often in solo, duo, or quartet settings. Across the Atlantic, a different evolution was taking place. In the United States, the steel string guitar was being developed. This innovation, driven by the demands of folk and popular music, gave the guitar a new, brighter voice. It became a staple in the burgeoning American music scene, from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi Delta. By the early 20th century, it would reshape and dominate genres like blues, country, early jazz, as well as a plethora of European local genres. The revival of the guitar in the 19th century was not just about technological advancements, it was about a cultural reawakening. The guitar's resurgence was deeply intertwined with the era's spirit of exploration and expression. It became a symbol of the Romantic ideal, a vessel for personal and artistic freedom. By the beginning of the 20th century, the guitar had firmly established itself as a beloved instrument, cherished both in the salons of Europe and the front porches of America. At the same time, in the Middle East, the oud remained one of the most popular instruments, often accompanying vocals, much in the way guitars are used in the West. And mass manufacturing techniques made quality ouds attainable to every man, finding its way into remote areas and minority cultures who previously may not have had a strong oud tradition. However, in the West, for racial, cultural, and anti-Muslim reasons, the oud was treated as a primitive or just strange and irrelevant offshoot, and its importance to the invention of the guitar and other Western instruments deliberately hidden. Unfortunately, in today's time of global media, the instant availability of media through the internet and the pretense of tolerance, these notions have largely remained when it comes to the history of the guitar. As we move into the 20th century, a new narrative begins to take shape around the guitar, particularly in the Anglo-American world. This narrative often overlooks the instrument's rich Spanish heritage, focusing instead on its development in the United States and Northern Europe. Historical polemics and cultural biases against Latin America have played a role in shaping this perception. Yet the reality is far more intricate. Latin America, with its diverse cultures and musical traditions, boasts an incredible variety of guitar-like instruments. From the charango of the Andes to the cuatro of Venezuela and Puerto Rico, these instruments evolved between the 16th and 19th centuries and remain popular to this day. In Mexico, the vihuela and the guitarra are central to mariachi music, while in Brazil, the seven-string guitar, or violão de sete cordas, adds depth to the rich harmonies of choro and samba. These instruments and their unique sounds reflect the region's complex history and cultural syncretism, blending indigenous, African, and European influences. Despite their significant contributions to the guitar's evolution, these Latin American instruments are often marginalized in mainstream narratives. The guitar story in the Anglo-American context tends to highlight the steel string guitar's rise in American folk, blues, and country music, while downplaying the profound impact of Spanish and Latin American luthiers and musicians. In the last few decades, the West has also increasingly embraced a hateful, antagonistic attitude against Muslims and Middle Eastern culture. The irony of this becomes truly chilling when you see how many of these hold Western popular music and even rock as a symbol of their pride in their European heritage, the superiority of their Western culture. How absurd is it that something so central to our perception of our Western culture, the guitar and its related musical genres, are Arabic and Muslim in its origin? That such a central object of our Western popular culture, that is even used to represent its superiority and coolness over other parts of the world in some hate propaganda, is in fact from the very culture such people tend to hate the most. Maybe the truth of the history of the guitar is something of a key to improving understanding between our different cultures. The bare fact that the guitar is Middle Eastern in origin needs to be taught in mass media and schools without obfuscation or hesitation. Please subscribe and check out the other videos of our channel for more takes on subjects beyond the coverage of mainstream discourse.